Well, we've just finished a month of preparing to celebrate the first Advent. When you think about Christmas time, you think of all the preparation and effort that goes into celebrating the coming of Jesus. Decorating Christmas trees, going out Christmas shopping, dealing with the crowds, preparing food for family and friends and Christmas parties, and traveling, listening to Christmas music, going to worship services for the last 4 weeks. Last night we had 3 services, and a lot of people were here. During the Advent season, we focus on the coming of Jesus, the angels appearing to Joseph and Mary, telling them about the coming of the new child. Their trip to Bethlehem, where Jesus was literally born in a barn or a manger. Not a very glamorous or glorious first coming. The coming of the Messiah was taught in the Old Testament. It was prophesied. Everyone knew about it. Everyone expected it to happen someday. But no one really had any clue when the Messiah would come. And then one day, a normal day, just like any other day, the Bible tells us that Jesus came to earth, God in human flesh. It seems like that no one was really ready or expecting him to come. Everyone seemed to have missed it. No one noticed. The angels knew. The angels informed the shepherds outside of Bethlehem. Later, 3 wise men showed up. They knew who he was, but nobody else knew that baby born in that manger in Bethlehem that day, no one knew who he was. People went on with their lives. They were oblivious that God in human flesh had arrived on earth. For 30 years, Jesus lived a regular life in a town of Nazareth. He worked as a carpenter. People had no idea that God had come and was living among them. Celebrating the first Advent is over for another year after today. Take down the Christmas decorations, pay the bills when they come in. After the Christmas season is over, what should be our focus after today? Well, in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus answers that question. He talks about the second Advent. He tells us that he's coming again. You know, there's a lot of similarities that we should take notice of that happened in the past, the first Advent, that'll happen in the next one. Like the first Advent, no one knows when it will occur. In verse 36 of Matthew chapter 24, according to Jesus, he says that the day nor hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father knows when the Son will return. You know, over the years, many years, I've listened to preachers and teachers and speculators try to figure out the approximate date of the second coming of Christ. I'm sure many of you have read authors and heard people talk about it. Some are bold enough to even try to declare a date and to convince their followers to sell all their possessions, only to be left looking foolish after the date comes and goes. I remember years ago in 1988, I had just been appointed at another church, and on the chair that I usually sat on in the sanctuary, the first Sunday there, somebody left a book for me to read. It was called 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1988. I didn't bother to read it. And that was 28 years ago, so I'm sure that guy who wrote the book spent an awful lot of time. And he probably was really embarrassed, too. Just like the first Advent, most people are generally unconcerned and oblivious to the fact that Jesus is coming again. It's not probably something a lot of people give thought to. Jesus uses the story of Noah to illustrate his point about his second coming. He says, "For as the days of Noah were, so will the coming of the Son of Man be." You might ask, well, what were the days of Noah like? Well, they were normal times. People were going about their lives. They were eating, drinking, working, raising their families. But then he tells a story about a guy that God told to prepare. He said, make sure you're prepared. He says, prepare for what? Well, a flood is coming. The Greek word for flood is kind of interesting. It's kataklysmos, which we get the English word cataclysmic. Noah was warned to prepare for a cataclysmic disaster. So he listened, he paid attention, and we all know the story. He built an ark. I'm sure while that ark was being built, many were watching and wondering, what's this guy doing? Building this big old boat in his backyard. Noah told him in 2 Peter chapter 5, it tells us, Noah told him what he was doing. Noah told him that he was preparing. You think they listened? No, I don't think they listened. They no doubt ignored him, probably considered him a nut. How many of you have ever seen somebody standing on the street corner carrying a sign saying, prepare for the day of the Lord is near? Have you ever seen those? I remember when I was over at Jensen Beach, pastoring over there, every day, when I'd go to the hospital there in Martin County, there was a guy standing there. He had his own sound system every single day at lunchtime, holding up a sign, prepare for the end is near. And, it got to the place where I'd drive by him so many times, I didn't even notice he was there anymore. I'm sure everybody thought he was kind of crazy. Just think about what they thought of Noah building that boat in his backyard. But then one day it started raining, Jesus says, and the unprepared were swept away by a cataclysmic disaster. I'm sure that when they were holding on to the treetops, they thought, oh, Noah was right. I wish we would have listened. I wish we would have prepared. I'm sure most of us here today would agree that Jesus is coming again. How many believe that? You believe Jesus is going to return. But that's for another day, another generation. Someone else will have to deal with it. I don't think I'll be around. I may think that. Most of us probably do. We have our whole life ahead of us. We can go ahead and live our lives, but somebody else will have to be there for that event. But you know what? That's not the attitude that Jesus instructs us to have. In verse 42, he tells us, listen to what he says. He says, keep awake. He says, you don't know when the day of the Lord is coming.